Jessie Redmon Fauset, midwife of Harlem Renaissance. Jessie Redmon Fauset is remembered for being one of the 3 people who midwifed the so-called New Negro movement into being, according to Langston Hughes, and the importance of her role in the development in the new literary movement ironically overshadows her own work and achievements. This statement alone brings to light her invaluable contributions to the Harlem Renaissance and the female role of such developments. The publication of her 4 novels, her work as a writer and editor, make her one of the richest novelists of the Harlem Renaissance. However, her work is obscured by the focus on her background rather than on her magnificent work and the first African American and woman to graduate from Cornell University with the Phi Beta Kappa key, one of the most prestigious honor societies in the country. She was born in Snow Hill Center Township in New Jersey on April 27, 1882. She was the daughter of Redmon Fauset, a minister of an African Methodist Episcopal Church, and his wife Annie Seaman Fauset. She had been labeled as a middle-class African American of the era, but her financial circumstances were considerably lower. She grew up in Philadelphia's public education system, and she attended high school for girls in 1900, graduating with honors. She was known to be ambitious and hoped to attend Bryn Mawr College, a well-respected school, but they refused to allow an African American to enroll. To avoid the issue of admitting a black student, she was instead sponsored with a scholarship at Cornell University, where she thrived. However, despite her success in college, she was unable to secure employment in Philadelphia due to the continued practice of segregation. Nevertheless, she was able to find a teaching position in Baltimore and later in Washington, D.C., where she taught French and Latin until 1918. While working to complete her master's degree at the University of Pennsylvania, she began to work for the Crisis, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People journal, which was edited by W.B. Du Bois. She became the editor of that journal in 1919 and served to that extent until 1926. During this time, she was particularly keen on detecting literary excellence and showed her capacity and willingness for an extraordinary work ethic, and wrote her own essays and fiction as well. This media provided a platform to emphasize Black life in America. The tone of her work, especially in her essays, was one that brought up a range of concerns that are not encountered anywhere else in the literature of the period. The primary goal of her work was to bring up themes of racial discrimination, racial passing, and feminism, and to expose the reality of the middle class of Black America. One of her books, There is Confusion, was written in 1924 as a response to another book written by a white author, T.S. Stribling, entitled Birthright, which misrepresented the realities of the middle-class African-American way of life, and she was determined to correct the mistakes he presented. She continued to take most of the responsibility for the operations of the magazine publications while Du Bois was not available. She also edited and wrote some of the pieces in the Brownies book, a monthly magazine for African-American children. It is unclear why she left her position at Crisis, but after 7 years she went back to teaching. In 1929, Fauset married Herbert Harris, a World War II veteran and insurance broker, and moved to New Jersey. She did not publish anything else after her last novel, comedy, American Style, in 1933. Besides basic information about her life, there is very little information about her personal experiences and feelings about her family or death of her mother. However, that does not diminish her achievements and contributions to one of the most important eras of African American history and her contributions to the establishment of the Harlem Renaissance as a writer and editor. While she was not one of the most prominent and famous authors that arose from Harlem Renaissance, but her work as an editor and mentor for many other authors opened the door for freedom of expression in topics that had not been previously exposed. In Plum Bun, Fauset brings to light the concept of racial discrimination and negative views within the community for not being Black enough, or aspiring to be white and being accepted as a member of the white community, otherwise known as racial passing. She spoke of freedom, which was not a new topic, but for the first time, there was an exposure of the racial identity issues within the community of those with mixed ancestry and gender inequality. The importance of the exposure of such topics influenced new authors and artists in Harlem to bring up the truths of African Americans through the various expressions of art, music, and literature. As a midwife, she facilitated the birth of new forms of expression that became known as the rebirth of African American art. Her contribution as the editor of Crisis, as well as her own work, enabled further exposure of essential characteristics of the lives of African Americans within the United States. The Harlem Renaissance, also known as the New Negro Movement during the 1920s, was a very powerful movement of the resurgence of literature, music, and art, and those who facilitated its rebirth, as well as those who thrived, have left behind legacies that will forever live in history. In 1939, she moved back to Philadelphia and died of heart disease in April of 1961. Jessie Redmon Fauset's work was republished during the 1960s and 70s, and by the 1990s, her work was again remembered for her feminist depictions of an African American woman. Her work translates to modern society in the United States, and the themes of racial, social, and gender inequality, as well as racial identity, remain applicable. Today, she is honored in the National Portrait Gallery in the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., for her work as an outstanding American of Negro origin, and her portrait, among others, traveled the country as a visual rebuttal to racism. The best way to honor someone of such importance as Jessie Redmon Fauset is to never allow her legacy to be forgotten.